It's a Tuesday evening, January 24th, 2023. Most of the world is asleep, or close to it, when a 79-page document starts circulating through the private chat groups of financial analysts, market journalists, and hedge fund managers around the globe. No press conference, no warning, just a link, a title, and the kind of silence that precedes something catastrophic.
The title reads, Adani Group, How the World's Third Richest Man is Pulling the Largest Con in Corporate History.
Within an hour, someone screenshots it and posts it to Twitter. Within 2 hours, it's trending. By midnight, newsrooms in Mumbai, New York, London, and Singapore are scrambling to reach their financial correspondents. By the time the Bombay Stock Exchange rings its opening bell the next morning, one of the biggest corporate demolition jobs in the history of global finance is already underway.
$100 billion. Gone. Not in a slow bleed, not in a gradual loss of confidence, in 72 hours. Now, to understand why a single PDF could do that, to understand why one research firm in Lower Manhattan could make a man worth $140 billion watch his fortune dissolve like salt in warm water, you need to go back, way back. You need to go to a port city on the coast of Gujarat in the 1980s, to a teenage boy who dropped out of college and decided that the real classroom was the flow of money itself.
You need to understand how Gautam Adani built the empire, because you can't understand how it fell or whether it truly fell at all unless you first understand how something that large got built in the first place.
Strap in. This one will blow your mind.
A young man named Gautam Shantilal Adani, barely out of his teens, is sitting in a tiny office in the Diamond District of Mumbai. He's not there to buy diamonds. He's not there to sell them either. He's there to learn, to watch, to absorb the mechanics of how commodities move, how margins get made, how the people who control the flow of goods quietly accumulate more power than the people who make them.
He's 19 years old, he dropped out of college after his first year, and he is paying very close attention.
Adani was born in 1962, the sixth of 7 children in a middle-class Gujarati family. His father ran a textile business in Ahmedabad. Honest, stable, unremarkable. Gautam showed no particular interest in textiles. He showed interest in trade, in the invisible architecture of commerce, in the idea that somewhere between production and consumption was a space where a sharp mind could insert itself and extract extraordinary value.
So he went to Mumbai. He worked in diamond trading. He learned how to read the difference between what something costs and what it's worth, which is not the same thing and has never been. After a few years, his brother called him back to Ahmedabad to help manage a small plastics business. Adani went, but he didn't stay small. In 1988, at 26 years old, he founded Adani Exports, a company focused on agricultural commodity trading. The timing was not accidental. India was still a heavily protected economy. Its import-export landscape tangled in government permits, bureaucratic licensing, and the infamous license Raj that made every transaction a negotiation with the state. Adani understood this environment intuitively. He knew how to move inside it.
And then, in 1991, something changed everything. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, with his Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, liberalized the Indian economy. Overnight, the old rules cracked open. Private enterprise could breathe. Foreign investment could come in. Trade barriers softened. For someone who had spent years learning to navigate a closed system, an opening system was a different kind of opportunity entirely. Adani didn't just walk through the door, he sprinted. By the mid-1990s, he had moved into something far bigger than agricultural trading. He had moved into infrastructure, specifically ports. In 1995, the Adani Group won a lease to develop and operate the Mundra port in Gujarat, a small, underdeveloped stretch of coastline on the Gulf of Kutch. Nobody else particularly wanted it. The location was remote, the infrastructure was minimal, and the investment required to make it useful was significant. Adani took it. What Mundra became is one of the most striking examples of infrastructure as empire in modern Indian business history. From a scrubby coastal lease, Adani transformed it into India's largest commercial port. Then he built power plants near it. Then he built logistics corridors connecting it to inland markets. Then he built coal mines to feed those power plants. Each piece was designed to feed every other piece, a vertically integrated machine that generated revenue at every stage of a supply chain he largely controlled himself. By the mid-2000s, the Adani Group had become something genuinely extraordinary, a conglomerate with fingers in ports, power, commodities, real estate, and logistics. Its revenues were massive. Its political connections were even more conspicuous.
And that really is where the story gets complicated.
Because Gautam Adani's rise did not happen in a vacuum, it happened in Gujarat. And the man who ran Gujarat for over a decade before he went on to run India was Narendra Modi. The connection between those two facts is not incidental, and it has never quite gone away.
Let's be precise about this, because precision matters when you're talking about political relationships in India.
Narendra Modi became Chief Minister of Gujarat in 2001. Gautam Adani's business was already established there, rooted in Mundra, expanding rapidly. Over the next 13 years, as Modi governed Gujarat and transformed it into what he called a model of development, efficient, business-friendly, fast-moving, the Adani Group expanded at a pace that was, by any serious analysis, remarkable. Mundra Port grew from handling a few million tons of cargo to handling hundreds of millions. Adani Power became one of India's largest private power producers. Adani Enterprises diversified into coal, agribusiness, and urban infrastructure. Land allocations, port concessions, power purchase agreements, the contracts kept coming. And they kept coming, in many cases, from Gujarat's state government. Critics, including opposition politicians and investigative journalists, began documenting what they saw as a pattern: government contracts flowing with unusual generosity to Adani companies, land acquired at favorable rates, regulatory approvals processed with suspicious speed. One Gujarat-based investigative journalist wrote extensively about what she characterized as a sweetheart relationship between the Adani Group and the state government, a relationship she documented with land records, contract documents, and government files. The Adani Group consistently denied any impropriety. Modi's government in Gujarat consistently denied any favoritism. And on one level, you can make the case that what was happening in Gujarat was simply what Modi's development model looked like in practice: aggressive private investment in infrastructure supported by a government that believed in removing obstacles for business. What some called cronyism, others called efficiency. But here's what's not in dispute. When Narendra Modi won the general election in 2014 and became Prime Minister of India, Gautam Adani's jet was one of the aircraft in the convoy. When Modi flew to Delhi to take power for the first time, Adani was on a plane in the same formation. The symbolism of that image, two men from Gujarat arriving together at the seat of national power, was not lost on anyone watching.
And what happened to the Adani Group after 2014 was not subtle.
Between 2014 and 2022, the total market capitalization of Adani Group companies grew from roughly $7 billion to over $220 billion. Let that settle for a moment. In 8 years, the group's market value multiplied by more than 30 times. Gautam Adani, who had been a wealthy but relatively obscure businessman through most of his career, became one of the richest human beings on the planet. At his peak, he was briefly the second richest person in the world. He surpassed Elon Musk briefly on a single day in September 2022. His net worth, at its height, exceeded $140 billion. Airports, highways, green energy, data centers, defense manufacturing, media. The Adani Group was expanding into every sector that India's infrastructure-hungry government needed to build out. And the government kept showing up as a customer, a regulator, a partner. The question that serious analysts had begun asking, quietly at first, then more loudly, was not whether this growth was real. Some of it clearly was. Mundra Port was real. The power plants were real. The coal was real. The question was a different and far more dangerous one. Were the stock prices real? because the numbers on the exchange screens had begun to look like something that didn't quite match the underlying businesses. The valuations attached to Adani companies were not just high, they were, by conventional financial analysis, extraordinary. Companies in Adani's portfolio were trading at price-to-earnings multiples that made seasoned investors blink. Adani Enterprises, Adani Ports, Adani Green, Adani Total Gas, Adani Transmission. Each of them carried price tags that assumed not just success, but decades of flawless, uninterrupted dominance. Some analysts had begun flagging this as early as 2020. A few reports circulated within institutional finance circles, raising questions about who was actually buying these stocks, who was maintaining the demand that kept prices elevated, and whether the trading volumes and shareholder structures of Adani companies reflected genuine investor confidence or something more engineered.
Nobody could quite put all the pieces together. Not yet. But someone was already building the case.
Nathan Anderson founded Hindenburg Research in 2017, naming it after the infamous airship disaster, a name that rather bluntly signals his firm's purpose: to find things that are inflated and watch them come down.
Short sellers like Hindenburg occupy a peculiar and often vilified position in financial markets. They profit when stock prices fall. Their business model requires them to find companies whose stocks they believe are overvalued, bet against those stocks by shorting them, publish research exposing the problems, and then collect when the market reacts. Critics call them financial predators who destroy companies for profit. Defenders argue they're the only people with a real financial incentive to uncover corporate fraud. Everyone else has skin in the game of prices staying high.
What's beyond debate is that Hindenburg had a track record. The reports on Nikola, the electric truck company whose founder had deceived investors with a truck that literally rolled downhill for a promotional video, triggered SEC charges and a criminal conviction. Their research on other companies had similarly drawn regulatory action. They were not writing op-eds, they were building legal cases.
And for 2 years, starting in 2021, a small team at Hindenburg had been investigating the Adani Group. The scope of the investigation was extraordinary. Hindenburg researchers spoke to former Adani executives. They interviewed investigators, journalists, and financial professionals who had previously raised questions about the group. They reviewed thousands of documents across multiple countries. They traced corporate structures through the Cayman Islands, Mauritius, and several other offshore jurisdictions. They analyzed trading records, shareholder filings, and financial disclosures from Adani companies dating back more than a decade. What they claimed to have found was not minor accounting irregularities. It was not a difference of opinion about depreciation schedules or revenue recognition policies. What Hindenburg claimed to have found was the architecture of systemic fraud. The core allegations were several. First, that the Adani Group had engaged in brazen stock manipulation and accounting fraud over multiple decades. Second, that the family had used a network of offshore shell companies, entities with opaque ownership, minimal staff, and addresses in tax havens, to secretly hold and trade shares in Adani Group's listed companies, in violation of Indian law's rules about minimum public shareholding. Third, that this offshore structure had been used to artificially inflate the prices of Adani stocks, creating the appearance of a liquid, widely owned conglomerate, when in reality the ownership was dramatically more concentrated and the trading activity dramatically more artificial than disclosed. Fourth, that Adani companies had taken on dangerous levels of debt secured against stock that was itself inflated, creating a fragile pyramid structure that could unwind catastrophically if confidence broke.
The report named specific entities, it named specific individuals, it cited specific transactions, and it named one particular man, Vinod Adani, Gautam Adani's elder brother, largely invisible in the public narrative of the Adani Group, as a central figure in managing the offshore network. Vinod Adani, the report alleged, had been involved in running an opaque web of entities across Mauritius, the UAE, the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore, entities that, according to Hindenburg, held billions in Adani stocks off the books. The Adani Group had 24 hours notice before the report dropped. They knew it was coming. When it landed with the force of something long compressed suddenly releasing. And the Indian stock market opened its eyes.
January 25th, 2023. Indian markets open.
Within minutes, Adani Group stocks begin to fall. Not gradually, not in the way that stocks drift downward when sentiment shifts. They fall hard and fast, the way prices move when investors are not reconsidering their positions, but fleeing them.
Adani Enterprises, the group's flagship company, drops nearly 20% in a single session. Adani Total Gas collapses. Adani Green Energy, Adani Ports, Adani Transmission, all of them fall, a synchronized cascade of declining prices across the entire portfolio. By the close of January 25th, approximately $48 billion in market value has been destroyed in a single trading day. The timing, it should be noted, could not have been more spectacularly inconvenient for the Adani Group. At that precise moment, Adani Enterprises was in the middle of one of the largest follow-on public offerings in Indian stock market history, a $2.5 billion share sale. The stock price crashing while you're actively trying to sell shares to the public is not a situation that resolves itself neatly. The Adani Group's initial response was swift and comprehensive, in the way that corporations with large communications budgets tend to be swift. They released a 413-page rebuttal document. Yes, 413 pages. It addressed Hindenburg's allegations point by point, denied the core charges of fraud, called the report a calculated attack on India's sovereign financial interests, and framed the whole episode as foreign short sellers profiting from an attack on an Indian national champion. That framing, "This is an attack on India," was not accidental. It was politically elegant and immediately understood. To many Indian nationalists, the idea of a Western short-selling firm targeting the country's most prominent conglomerate read as a form of economic aggression. Social media lit up with defenders of Adani, some genuine and some suspiciously coordinated. Politicians from Modi's party described the Hindenburg report as a conspiracy against India's development. The government said nothing officially, which in itself said something. But here's where it got truly extraordinary. Even as the political defense machinery mobilized, the markets kept falling. Investors, not American short sellers, not foreign hedge funds, but ordinary Indian mutual fund holders, retail investors, pension funds, were reading the 106 pages and making their own calculations. And what the market was saying, in the blunt language of prices, was that it believed more of Hindenburg's document than the Adani Group's rebuttal. By the end of the first week after the report, the Adani Group had lost over $100 billion in market capitalization. $100 billion, roughly equivalent to the entire GDP of Morocco, had been wiped from the paper value of the group's stocks. Gautam Adani himself, whose net worth was largely tied to those stocks, fell from the world's top 3 richest people to outside the top 20 in a matter of days. The speed of the fall was almost cinematic. The man who had been briefly richer than Warren Buffett was now watching his fortune dissolve in real time. And then he did something unexpected. He canceled the share offering.
On February 2nd, 2023, the Adani Group announced it was returning the $2.5 billion it had already raised from investors in the follow-on public offering. The official statement cited market volatility and expressed concern for investor interests. What it communicated to the markets was clear. The group had decided that proceeding with the offering at collapsed stock prices would be impossible. The window had slammed shut.
For critics, this was a significant moment. Companies with solid fundamentals and clean books don't typically cancel their major fundraising events because someone published a hostile report. They ride it out, let the facts speak, and let investors decide. The cancellation felt to many observers like a signal.
But just when it seemed the empire might actually crack, something happened that nobody had quite predicted. February and March 2023. The dust is still settling. Adani stocks are down, but not in free fall. The Hindenburg report is being analyzed by every financial regulator, academic, and independent journalist who can read a balance sheet. The Indian government has asked the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, India's market regulator, to investigate the allegations. And then, on March 2nd, 2023, a phone rings somewhere in Abu Dhabi. Actually, it's probably more complicated than that, but the result is this. GQG Partners, an American investment management firm led by Rajiv Jain, announces that it is investing $1.87 billion across 4 Adani Group companies. It is buying shares at the depressed post-Hindenburg prices. It is, in effect, making a very large and very public bet that the Adani Group is not what Hindenburg said it is. The announcement is immediate and electric. Markets respond the way markets respond when a credible institutional investor signals confidence. They push prices up. Adani stocks, which had been limping sideways for weeks, surge. GQG's investment is not just money, it's a statement. It's a fund manager with a strong track record saying, in the most financially binding way possible, that he believes the Adani Group is fundamentally sound and that Hindenburg is wrong.
Rajiv Jain would later elaborate on his thesis in media interviews. He had done his own due diligence, he said. He believed the assets were real and undervalued at post-crash prices. He was comfortable with the risk. He pointed out that he had invested in plenty of companies with complex political relationships and regulatory environments. That was simply the nature of emerging market investing. The narrative around Adani began to shift. The stock recovery gave the group's defenders fresh ammunition. Nationalist commentators pointed to GQG as evidence that the international investment community had seen through the Hindenburg attack. Some Indian media, long inclined toward favorable coverage of a group that spent heavily on advertising, pivoted back to their normal posture. But the investigation hadn't stopped. SEBI was working through the documents. Journalists at the Financial Times, The Guardian, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project were pulling threads. The Hindenburg allegations, particularly the claims about offshore shareholding structures and stock manipulation, were not the kind of thing that a stock price recovery resolved. You can't disprove an allegation of fraud by pointing out that your shares went back up. In August 2023, the Supreme Court of India, which had taken up the Hindenburg matter in response to public interest litigation, received SEBI's partial findings. The regulator had investigated 24 of the specific allegations from the Hindenburg report and found it could not conclusively establish violations in most of them. The Supreme Court ultimately declined to transfer the investigation away from SEBI, accepting its findings as adequate.
Critics were dissatisfied. The Hindenburg report had identified specific offshore entities, specific transactions, specific account structures. The question of whether those entities were used to manipulate stock prices, which is what the report's most explosive allegation required proving, demanded access to data across multiple offshore jurisdictions, many of which are not exactly forthcoming with Indian regulators. SEBI's inability to conclusively establish violations did not necessarily mean the violations hadn't occurred. It might simply mean the evidence was structured to be very hard to reach.
Hindenburg, for its part, had anticipated this. In a follow-up statement, they argued that SEBI's investigation had avoided directly addressing the most material allegations, and that the regulator was not acting independently given the political sensitivity of the target.
The battle had moved from markets to courtrooms to op-ed pages to parliamentary debate, and it wasn't close to finish.
Because what nobody knew yet was that the real second act was still being written, and it would hit closer to home than anyone expected. August 10th, 2024, Hindenburg Research publishes a second document about India. This one isn't about the Adani Group directly, it's about SEBI. Specifically, it's about SEBI's chairperson, Madhabi Puri Buch, and her husband, Dhruv Buch. Hindenburg alleges that the couple had invested in certain offshore funds linked to the same obscure offshore structure that Hindenburg had alleged the Adani Group used to manipulate its own stock. The implication was stark and direct. The person running India's investigation into potential Adani fraud had a financial stake in entities connected to that alleged fraud. The timing was surgical. SEBI had just issued a show cause notice to Hindenburg about its original short position, essentially raising the possibility of regulatory action against the firm for the way it had disclosed and profited from its Adani bet. Hindenburg's response was to release the second report, escalating the conflict to a place where SEBI itself was now the subject of scrutiny. Madhabi Puri Buch and her husband denied everything. They issued a detailed public statement saying their investments had been legitimate, disclosed appropriately to relevant authorities, and had no connection to the Adani investigation.
They said Hindenburg's allegations were a calculated attack on the institution of SEBI and on India's regulatory framework. The Adani Group denied any connection between its offshore entities and the funds referenced in Hindenburg's second report. Parliament exploded. The opposition, led by Rahul Gandhi's Congress Party and the India Bloc, demanded a parliamentary inquiry. They wanted Puri Booch to testify before a parliamentary committee. They called for the Supreme Court to intervene again. They described the whole situation, the alleged regulatory capture, the alleged offshore connections, the government's silence, as evidence of a systemic rot at the heart of Indian financial governance. The government did not concede the argument. BJP politicians pointed out that Hindenburg was a financially motivated actor with billions in short positions, that its allegations against SEBI were transparently designed to shield itself from regulatory accountability, and that the entire episode was an attempt by a foreign firm to undermine Indian institutions for profit. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Both of these things can be simultaneously accurate. Hindenburg can be a financially motivated actor that profits from corporate collapses and be raising legitimate questions about governance. Puri Booch can have had her investments properly disclosed, and those investments can raise legitimate questions about the appearance of conflicts. These are not mutually exclusive propositions, and the Indian public debate, caught between nationalism and financial sophistication, often failed to hold them in the same hand at once. What the second report definitively accomplished was this. It transformed the Adani story from a corporate scandal into a story about the integrity of Indian financial regulation itself. And that is a far bigger and far more dangerous story. But as that battle raged, the Adani Group wasn't sitting still. It was rebuilding. Here's a fact about very large, politically connected conglomerates that doesn't get discussed enough. They are almost impossible to kill with a report. A company lives or dies on its access to capital, its operating revenues, and its political protection. The Adani Group had all three, and none of them had vanished because of Hindenburg. The ports kept operating. Mundra Port, which now handles more container traffic than any other port in India, didn't stop loading ships because Nathan Anderson published a PDF. The power plants kept generating electricity. The coal kept moving. The real assets, the ones you could photograph from satellite, the ones that employed hundreds of thousands of people, the ones that India's industrial and energy economy had become genuinely dependent on, those assets were not in question. What was in question was valuation. And valuation, as any serious investor knows, is a different beast from solvency. In the months after the Hindenburg crisis, the Adani Group undertook a deliberate and sophisticated rehabilitation campaign. It hired new independent directors with unimpeachable reputations. It prepaid several $1 billion of debt secured against group stocks, removing a structural vulnerability that Hindenburg had specifically highlighted. It released more detailed financial disclosures than it had previously provided. It gave interviews and press briefings. It hired international law firms and accounting consultants to conduct independent reviews and publish their findings. GQG Partners increased its investment. A number of other institutional investors, looking at post-crash prices on assets they believed were fundamentally sound, came in. International banks, which had quietly pulled back from Adani deal-making in the immediate aftermath of January 2023, began coming back to the table. Total Energies of France, which had partnerships with Adani Green on solar energy projects, stood by its investments. IHC, an Abu Dhabi sovereign-backed conglomerate, maintained its stake. By mid-2024, Adani Group stocks had recovered substantially from their lows. Gautam Adani was back among the world's 10 richest people. The FPO fiasco of early 2023 had been replaced by successful capital raises. The narrative was being rewritten, or at least contested. And the Adani Group continued to win contracts. India's airports, 6 of them, including Mumbai's international airport handling tens of millions of passengers, were being managed and expanded by Adani. Major highway construction contracts were flowing through Adani's infrastructure arms. Green energy contracts were being signed. Defense manufacturing agreements were being formalized. Critics made the obvious observation: a company under serious investigation for stock manipulation was still, somehow, expanding its footprint in every direction. The government was still, somehow, a willing partner. If the Hindenburg allegations were even partially true, the normal consequence, heightened regulatory scrutiny, reduced access to government contracts, reputational damage with institutional partners, did not seem to be materializing at the expected scale.
Supporters made the equally obvious counter-observation. Perhaps the Hindenburg allegations simply weren't as solid as they appeared, and what critics were interpreting as improper protection was simply the market and the government making rational decisions about a major infrastructure company that, whatever its flaws, was operationally critical. The truth, and this is the most important sentence in this entire story, is that we don't fully know. The offshore structures exist. The regulatory investigation produced limited results. The political relationship is undeniable, but the specific mechanism of fraud that Hindenburg alleged, the controlled offshore shareholding, the coordinated price manipulation, requires a standard of proof that the available evidence has not yet definitively reached. What we know is troubling. What we can prove in a court of law is a different matter. And then, just when the story seemed to be settling into a quieter chapter, the United States government walked in.
November 20th, 2024, federal prosecutors in New York unseal a criminal indictment. The document charges several individuals with conspiracy to violate the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The allegation that massive bribes were paid to Indian state government officials to secure solar energy supply agreements that would have been worth billions of dollars to the companies involved.
Gautam Adani is named in the indictment.
Not as a convicted person, not as a proven criminal, as someone charged. And under the American legal system, every person named in an indictment is presumed innocent until proven guilty. This distinction matters enormously and is often glossed over in the hysterical coverage that follows any high-profile indictment. But this is not nothing. A U.S. federal indictment is not a blog post or a short seller's research note. It is the product of a grand jury process conducted by federal prosecutors with subpoena power, access to witnesses, and the full investigative resources of American law enforcement. The allegations it contained, that state government officials had been bribed with approximately $265 million to secure solar power purchase agreements for Adani Green Energy, were specific, documented, and serious. The Adani Group issued a denial. They called the allegations baseless and said they were seeking legal remedies. Gautam Adani himself denied the charges entirely. The geopolitical reverberations were immediate. India summoned the U.S. ambassador to express concern about the indictment's framing. Indian politicians from the ruling party accused the American legal system of being weaponized against Indian business. The U.S.-India relationship, which had been warming considerably through the Quad security framework and technology cooperation agreements, absorbed an awkward jolt. For the investors who had come back in after the Hindenburg crisis, the indictment was unwelcome. Several major institutional players who had been considering new Adani bombs quietly backed away. Kenya scrapped a nearly $2 billion airport deal with Adani. Sri Lanka announced it was reviewing a port project. Bangladesh canceled an Adani power supply agreement. The international business community, which had largely decided that the Hindenburg report was manageable, found the U.S. indictment harder to dismiss. Here's the critical distinction. The Hindenburg report alleged civil violations, stock manipulation, securities fraud, false disclosures. The U.S. indictment alleged criminal bribery, different legal standard, different consequence, different gravity. If the indictment goes to trial and results in convictions, the implications for the Adani Group's international business, particularly in countries where the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act has enforcement reach, would be severe. Major American companies and financial institutions operating under FCPA compliance obligations cannot maintain business relationships with entities found to be engaged in bribery with enormous legal risk to themselves.
The empire Adani built over 40 years, port by port, power plant by power plant, contract by contract, was facing its most serious legal challenge from the most powerful legal jurisdiction on Earth.
And the man at the center of it all was not hiding.
What does Gautam Adani actually look like up close?
In the rare lengthy interviews he has given, he comes across as someone who is comfortable with power and impatient with what he considers bad faith questions. He talks about India's infrastructure deficit with genuine passion, the ports, the airports, the energy gap, the logistics cost burden that keeps Indian goods uncompetitive. He talks about his company's role in closing that gap with something that sounds like genuine conviction. He is not performing. He believes at some level in the story of Adani as a national project.
He is also, by any account, a man who operates in a world where political relationships are not peripheral to business strategy, but central to it. In an economy where government is simultaneously the regulator, the customer, the licensor, and the partner, no significant infrastructure business exists outside the political ecosystem. The question is not whether you have political relationships. The question is whether you abuse them. The people who have worked with Adani or reported on him generally describe the same thing: an intensely focused man who sees problems as engineering challenges, who moves fast, who has an unusually high tolerance for regulatory and political complexity, and who has a specific ability to execute at scale that genuinely distinguishes him from many of his peers in Indian business.
His defenders say that India needed someone to build this stuff, that the alternative was not a cleaner version of Adani building the ports and the power plants, but the ports and the power plants not getting built, and that the country's development required the kind of aggressive, government-adjacent deal-making that uncomfortable people in Western financial markets can afford to find distasteful because their own infrastructure was built 100 years ago under far worse conditions.
His critics say that point, while partially fair, is doing a lot of work to cover a lot of problems. You can acknowledge that India needs ports and still believe that the process by which this particular person got to build this many of them, with this much financial support, at these valuations, with these offshore structures, was not clean.
What's strange about watching Gautam Adani navigate this moment in his life
Is the quality of his public composure.
he hasn't fled, he hasn't gone quiet. He showed up at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 2025, weeks after the US indictment, and gave a speech about India's economic future. He attended the inauguration of Donald Trump, standing in a section typically reserved for heads of state and major geopolitical allies. He is, whatever else one says about him, not behaving like a man who believes he has something to hide. Or he is very, very good at not behaving like that.
The question of which of those two things is true is the question that the next several years of legal proceedings will attempt to answer. Let's step back from the details for a moment and look at the larger shape of this story, because it's about something bigger than one man or one company. The Adani story is, at its core, a story about what happens when you have a democracy that is also a development state, a government that is simultaneously a promoter of economic nationalism and a participant in the markets it regulates, a media environment that has become financially dependent on the advertising of the companies it's supposed to scrutinize, and a legal system that is overloaded, slow, and imperfect.
In that environment, what does accountability actually look like?
The story is also about the limits of financial markets as truth-telling mechanisms. Stock prices are supposed to reflect reality. If a company's fundamentals are sound, investors will price it rationally. But the Adani story, if Hindenburg's allegations are even partially accurate, suggests that markets can be gamed, that offshore entities with enough money and enough coordination can maintain a false price for long enough that the false price becomes the reality. That by the time a critical mass of investors figures out what's happening, the company has used those inflated stocks to raise real capital, build real assets, accumulate real debt, and employ real people, making the unraveling of the fraud deeply consequential for parties who had nothing to do with it.
There's a darker version of this argument. It goes like this. Some of the world's biggest corporate empires were built on a combination of genuine value creation and extraordinary financial engineering. The question of where legitimate financial engineering ends and fraud begins is not always a clean line. And the companies that survive their scandals, that have enough real assets, enough political protection, enough institutional momentum, often go on to build more real assets until the distinction between the mirage and the mountain blurs beyond recognition.
The Adani Group might be one of those, or it might not be.
For India's 1.4 billion people, this story has specific and concrete stakes. If the Adani Group's energy assets, which supply electricity to a significant fraction of Indian homes and factories, are financially structured in ways that create systemic risk, then the consequences of collapse would not be abstract. If the airports and ports and highways that the group operates or is building are dependent on continued access to capital that could be cut off by regulatory action, then the country's infrastructure development sits on ground that may be less solid than it appears.
For the global financial system, the stakes are about precedent. How do you investigate and hold accountable a company that is simultaneously a private enterprise, a political ally of a major nuclear power, and an operational backbone of the world's most populous democracy? The tools available to regulators in New York, London, and Brussels were designed for a different era, a different kind of company, a different relationship between state and market.
And for Hindenburg, Nathan Anderson's firm, the one that lit the match, the stakes turned out to be existential in a different direction. In January 2025, Anderson announced that Hindenburg Research was disbanding. He said the personal and professional cost of the work had been too high. The firm closed. The report lives on. The investigations it triggered are ongoing.
But the firm that brought the world's attention to the Adani Group is gone.
Which raises a question that nobody in this story has yet been able to answer. Here's where we are. The U.S. indictment against Gautam Adani is working its way through the American legal system. The Adani Group is contesting it vigorously. Indian diplomatic pressure has been applied. The outcome is years away. SEBI's investigation into the original Hindenburg allegations was concluded without producing criminal charges, but with enough procedural controversy that the Indian Supreme Court has maintained oversight. Whether SEBI's investigation was thorough and independent, or whether it was shaped by political considerations that made serious accountability impossible, is a question that Indian civil society is still actively asking.
The offshore entities that Hindenburg identified, the network of Mauritius and Cayman registered funds, the opaque shareholding structures, the companies with addresses in tax havens, continue to exist, continue to be difficult to examine, and continue to be denied by the Adani Group as instruments of manipulation.
And the Adani Group itself continues to grow. New contracts, new projects, new capital. The airports handle more passengers, the ports handle more cargo. The green energy capacity keeps coming online. Whatever the legal outcomes, the operational reality of the Adani empire is an inescapable feature of the Indian economic landscape. The stock prices, which fell so spectacularly in January 2023, have partially recovered, though they remain below their pre-Hindenburg peaks. Gautam Adani remains one of the richest men in the world. He is, by any accounting, extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily powerful, and extraordinarily contested.
So is the Adani Group a mirage? Is it a $100 billion lie? Here is the honest answer. It is not entirely either. The assets are real. The operations are real. The jobs are real. The economic contribution is real. But whether the valuations that those assets have carried were ever anchored in financial reality, whether the structures that supported those valuations were legitimate, whether the political relationships that enabled this particular conglomerate to win this many contracts and receive this much support represent the normal frictions of emerging market capitalism or something more corrosive, those questions remain genuinely unresolved.
What's not unresolved is this. The story of Gautam Adani is a story about how power works in the modern world. It's about how the relationship between government and capital, between nationalism and accountability, between scale and scrutiny, creates spaces where things that shouldn't be possible become not just possible, but rewarded. It's about what happens when a country's developmental ambitions and its regulatory capacity are not moving at the same speed. It's about who gets to tell the truth and what happens to the people who try.
A port is real. The ground it's built on can still be soft. A fortune is real. The accounting that produced it can still be false. A country's pride and its economic rise is real. The stories it tells itself about that rise can still be incomplete. The trial in some form is still coming. The documents are still being subpoenaed.
The regulators are still working. The journalists are still reporting. The short sellers, different ones now since Hindenburg is gone, are still looking. Somewhere in a tower in Ahmedabad, Gautam Adani is still building.
What exactly he has built? A mountain or a mirage? An empire or an illusion? India's greatest business story, or its most sophisticated con, is a question that history hasn't finished answering.
But it's asking it loudly, and it won't stop.
If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to get notified when we post new content.